Welcome to the Quartet of Games Culture in March 2021. I'm presenting the Quartet of Games Culture as a host for the Stiftung Digitale Spielekultur, the Foundation for Digital Games Culture. My name is Lena Falkenhagen. I'm a narrative and content designer, presenter, and also chairwoman of the German Authors Association, VSVS. The Quartet of Games Culture is an established panel discussion format that discusses the social and cultural merit of video games from Germany and all over the world. Our fantastic topic today is discovering a new peace of mind, mental health in video games. We're going to talk about games tackling the topic of mental health, our own mental health maybe a bit while playing games, and the effect of the pandemic on us, and if games are keeping us sane in this situation. But at first, our kind organizer of this event from the Stiftung Digitale Spielekultur, or Foundation for Digital Games Culture, Christiane Gerke, wants to say a few words. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Welcome to the Quartet of Gaming Culture, unfortunately still online due to the pandemic. More than 1 year of lockdown and restrictions has had an impact to all of us. We are longing for a quick end of this difficult situation. But we fortunately have games that always bring us back into the light and make our lives a little bit more colorful. Fortunately, we can always play. Let me give you a few brief words about the Foundation. We believe in a society that shapes digital transformation with the help of games and acknowledges games as an enrichment of its culture. The Digital Games Culture Foundation wants to help shape digitization with the help of games. We see digital games as an enrichment of our cultural identity because games are a recognized cultural asset. That's why the Quartet focuses on the feuilletonistic, cultural, but also social-political aspect of video games. The Quartet is supported by the Federal Government Commissioner for Culture and the Media. Many thanks for that. For me, it comes to the last production of this wonderful format, and I would like to thank all of you for being with me. But as you know, people always meet twice in life. Now let's enjoy our awesome guests and back to our likewise awesome host, Lena. Have fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and let me thank you in return for all the wonderful things you did with the Quartet of Games Cultures in the past and present. Thank you so much. Yes, welcome back to our Quartet of Games Culture with the topic Discovering a New Peace of Mind, Mental Health in Video Games. A quartet needs 4 people, and that's why I'm calling my prolific guests into the ring today. Please meet Dom Schott, who is a free journalist for GameStar and Spiegel Online and Zeit Online magazines, a free lecturer for the Games Academy Berlin, and a podcast producer. He was also an editor at GamePro, and he studied archaeology, which is an odd thing to study when you intend to go into games, but we'll come to that later maybe. Welcome, Jupiter Hadley, an indie games journalist. She covers thousands of game jams and indie games on her YouTube channel. And she's also adept games wizard at Armor Games, where she finds free-to-play browser-based games to bring on board to the web portal. She has been working from home for all of her adult life, basically like me a bit. And she's talked about mental health on the Ludicious X Festival in late 2022. Welcome, Jupiter. And please meet Chris Wulf. He is a business development person. He's also organizer of the game developer event Talk and Dev. And he's been with those awesome guys. You were involved in the Indie Mega booth for Gamescom last year, I think, Chris. Welcome, you 3. I'm very happy to have you here.
It's good to be here. Hi.
Great. Okay. Mental health. We're in month 13 of the corona pandemic, the topic of mental health is basically all over the media. Often games use craziness, like indescript craziness, to motivate antagonists and bad guys. But since around the turn of the century, games with central characters suffering from mental health issues have been slowly blooming. The Silent Hills series, for example, handles this topic. The Suffering is a game that's featuring a traumatized, possibly psychotic man on death row, in which you can decide via your actions as a player if he has killed his family himself or not. That was 2004, by the way. One of the first characters, playable game characters featuring mental health issues. Since then, other games feature either side characters with mental health issues, some of the more noticeable being games like L.A. Noire with a deeply traumatized killer from Rockstar Games 2011, and Spec Ops The Line, a character with PTSD from Yaga 2012. And Life is Strange by Square Enix 2015, for example. But there are more and more games that revolve around mental health problems in their central theme or their main character. For example, Zoe Quinn's Depression Quest from 2013 absolutely revolves around depression, of course. From Germany, we have Sea of Solitude by Yomai Games that became internationally renowned for handling a serious topic like that. That was 2019. And today we're going to present you some of the more recent games featuring around this as their central theme, or in which the central character deals with mental health issues. Recent meaning like the last 4 or 5 years, actually. So this is how things are going to work. Each of us will present one game we associate with mental health in games. We'll then talk a bit about this game and the aspects that make it relevant to mental health. And after approximately 15 or 20 minutes, we'll turn to the next game. We're all games people here. We're not psychiatrists. That's quite important to mention. So we'll all look at the games from a game developers or game journalists' perspective. Okay, so let's start. Dom Schott, you picked the game Please Knock on My Door. How do you want to play this? Do you want to have the trailer first, or do you want to say something about the game first?
Yeah, I would like to show the trailer first. Yeah, I think that works best.
Okay, then please trailer go.
Sometimes it's important to put a lid on your emotions. It can be preferable in some situations. Just make sure to ease up the lid afterwards and let yourself feel again. If you don't ease up that lid, you might just forget how to do it. Bottling up emotions works for a while, but suddenly the lid just won't come off anymore. And then, years later, the bottle breaks.
So, Please Knock on My Door. Dom,
Yeah.
What fascinates you about this game and why did you choose it?
Yeah, first of all, let me say again that it's wonderful to be here because, especially because of this topic which fascinates and interests me in many ways. Over the years as a journalist, I've talked to a lot of people who make games about mental health. I've played their games, but there was one which resonated with me in a very intense way, and that's Please Knock on My Door from 2017, made by a Swedish developer called Michael Levall and 3 people who helped him. And This game is actually a management game. You control a young man suffering from depression and social anxiety, and you have to help him get through work and balance his own needs with maintaining a healthy social life. And when I say you help him with that, I don't actually mean you're with this person in this world. In fact, you are like this godlike creature which guides the main character through the game. You decide what he says to friends, his parents, and how he solves his daily problems. There's no classic game over screen, but several endings which are dictated by the decisions you're making while playing the game. There's no winning or losing in the classic sense. You can basically do whatever you want to do. You can skip work, for example, and play games instead. You can shower in the morning, in the evening, or not at all. The game is prepared for each of that action, and that's very interesting, and it responds to it. If you stop eating for a day, for example, the inner monologue of the main character reminds you to look after yourself and cook something. If you skip work or meetings with friends, it asks you to maintain a routine in your daily life. This inner voice basically wants you to take care of yourself. But the more you neglect this voice, the more you neglect your tasks, friends, food intake, and so on, the angrier and self-destructive this voice gets. And in the worst case, you start feeling worse and worse until it is too much and you can barely interact with the world around you at all. You walk more slowly and stuff like that. Options like interacting with the world are grayed out. And in this way, the game tries to show how your actions in daily life can have an immediate effect on your mental health and general well-being. The more you let yourself go, that's how the game thinks. The more tasks you neglect, the more you lose connection to the world around you, the worse you feel. And that's exactly what the maker of this game wanted from that experience. Michael Levall wanted to create a game which could help people understand how someone's daily life could look like if he or she suffered under depression. And that's both the thing I like the most about this game and the thing which deserves at least a bit of skepticism. Let me explain this. First of all, it's nice to have a game about depression and being depressed, which feels real. There are moments in this game which felt real and true and familiar to me, like dodging phone calls, feeling numb, feeling without any power over anything. And Michael Levall manages to show these moments without losing himself too much in cliches or tropes. And I think it helped that he mostly used his own experiences with depression as a kind of template for the game. And when I discovered this game in 2017, when it was released, I was personally in a very dark place. And instead of wanting to distract myself, I was longing for a game which would resonate with me and how I felt at that time. And Please Knock on My Door did that for me. It made me feel understood, embraced, not being alone with my problems. And that's, I think, a great value in games about mental health issues. But, and let me add this, there are two downsides of that. This game tells a very personal, unique story about depression. It's the story of a young, employed male with a social circle, friends, and parents. His story is only his story. It's not a story about depression and about showing how depressed people live. Everyone experiences this illness in a different way, and there are moments in which this game suggests what you play here is true for everyone who ever experienced depressive episodes. So you have to add the side note: if you intend to give this game to friends or family members, Please Knock on My Door is not a game about depression. It's a game about a person who suffers from depression. Also, and that's the second part of my criticism towards this game tends to evoke a melancholic, sad mood. You could already experience that in the trailer. There's often music in the background, sad, slow guitar and violin riffs, while from time to time the inner monologue of the main character speaks out, as I mentioned, texts both the protagonist and the player. So you should take your time and reflect if it is the right time to play this game if you're not ready for that experience.
Okay, thank you, Dom Schott, introducing to us Please Knock on My Door. That was quite an interesting game. I've looked at a whole gameplay video about that because I found it so interesting, and I didn't know it before, so thanks for that. You touched on a few questions that I would have about this game, and maybe Jupiter and Chris are having some questions in your directions too later. I'll start. So you said that the narrator is not like we're having a voiceover that is basically telling the story of the life of this man. And I too found from the gameplay video that this is not the player character, and you said that it's a godlike creature. So this is kind of so the perspective is very from the top down into the flat, onto the desk sometimes, of the man we're following. Is this perspective still helping, like, are you identifying with the character while playing that, or is it more like a means to distance yourself as a player from the character? What do you think?
Yeah, the choice of perspective, in this case, the top-down perspective, is a very interesting decision because you should think you would identify more with this character if you would play from the ego perspective or something like that. But that's a deliberate decision from the developer. He told in an interview to someone that he wanted people to have the feeling to look into another one's life and to have the possibility to experience moments and dilemmas they would personally never experience. And so it works like an looking glass into another person's life, and you can, like a god, make decisions for this person and force him to do things just to look what would happen if they would act like this. And I think it works very good.
Yeah, I also had this, like, it's kind of a peeping Tom perspective sometimes, isn't it? Because you feel like this distanced spectator who's not really involved in the problems, and you can do trial and error things with the person that's affected, and that's kind of horrible, isn't it? So you said it's raising awareness about depression, and it was being built by the developers as an example for depressions, and it uses the game format, I think, quite nicely. Would you recommend this game to a person that's actually suffering, like actively suffering from depression? You touched on that a bit before, but is this a bad thing because of the invoked melancholy that you talked about? Or would you say, please have somebody at your side you can talk with about this game? So is this a therapeutic game, or more like a game for people to understand other people's depression, maybe?
Yeah, that's primarily made for that purpose. It's supposed to be a game you can give family members or friends and say, play this, you will understand depression, the symptoms of depression and social anxiety maybe a bit more. Maybe you can understand me even more after playing this game. As I mentioned, this game helped me personally a lot because when I was in a very dark space, I was looking, like I mentioned, for games which would pick me up in this spot and travel with me into even darker places. And in a way, it helped me to find games like this. I played Max Payne, for example, also a very dark game, loosely around mental health issues as well. And this game was exactly what I personally needed. I needed a game which would pick me up and accompany me through these dark times. But I can imagine that a lot of people would have, could have been, well, let me rephrase it. I can imagine it's hard for people to play this game if they're right in a depressive episode right now, because if you play this game like you feel right now, if you're in a depressed episode and you play this game like you're really a depressed person, you neglect tasks, you don't go to work, you don't meet friends, you don't want to do anything, the game starts to treat you in a very bad way. It gets darker. it won't reach out to you anymore. The inner monologue of the main character starts to attack you, to call you names, down spiral you even further. And so I think it could backfire for these people. You should really think about if you want to start the game, if you're in the right place to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I would pass on this question to Jupiter. Jupiter, you talked. You were on the Ludicious X talk about mental health, and you talked briefly that you had a burnout episode in your life in your past. Me too. I'm being quite open about that. I think all the highly motivated and or self-motivated, passionate people sometimes have a burnout episode in their life. So, what do you think? Would you recommend a game like this to depressed people, or would you rather say maybe step away from it for a bit?
I had not actually heard of Please Knock on My Door before this, so it was really interesting to explore it and sort of see a game that's made like this. I always find it really quite amazing when developers make deeply personal games and share them with the world, and I'm a big fan of that. For myself, I don't ever find myself in a mind space where if I'm having lots of issues that I want to play a game with a character that have lots of issues, because I'm not in a space to fix anything. I'm in a space where I'm deeply broken and I need something else to come and help me, as opposed to me trying to put effort into fixing someone else. So I find it very interesting as a game that you would give to someone else to be like, this is how I feel. But on the flip side, as you've said, the game doesn't have all of the same stuff that a depressed person might have felt. It doesn't connect completely with someone. It's just got some aspects. So I find that it might be an interesting tool if you see bits of the game and you think that's the state I'm in, to share it with someone so that they can understand more of what might be good to help you in that case. But it's not something that I think I would play in the middle of me being in any way not feeling right myself.
Yeah. Chris, what about you? Thank you, Jupiter.
So I found myself in a place also for the first time exploring the game. I hadn't heard about it before, but it was quite an interesting experience. It hit very, very close to home in many ways, representing a phase that I went through a while ago as well. And in some sense, I guess, luckily being quite close to my own personal experience, I'd like to add to what Dom had said, like, it is a very particular kind of experience. And I found myself in many different situations feeling like I was quite limited in what I could decide and what I could pursue within the game. That didn't necessarily always represent the decisions that I made back then, the decisions that I would do or that I would go through with today, which put me in an odd spot and not necessarily a comfortable one, ending with me taking some breaks, having to step away a little bit from the experience. But overall, certainly an experience that, again, as Dom had said, very valuable and something that potentially could be very interesting to family members and friends to step close and get maybe their own view of how some people might feel in these particular situations. But it's certainly important to highlight that this is a very unique kind of story, not a generally representative one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I think that's something we can all agree on. So depression is a very personal thing, and go see a therapist if you think you're suffering from it. But I also think that raising awareness for that among players or among other people and relatives is a really good thing. One thing I wanted to talk about in this game, there is so the person you're directing in the game from on top is returning to the video game console or the PC to play games over and over again, and you can basically make increase these impulses. How were you feeling about that as like me, people who play video games a lot? Is that a symptom, or is that like an avoidance mechanism maybe sometimes playing too many games?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you start, Chris.
I think in that case, it sort of goes or boils down to what we had previously said. For some people, video games and the consumption of any form of media, TV also being relevant in this example, is certainly a coping mechanism or potentially even part of the problem. For myself, I found myself in the game mostly stepping away from both video games and TV. Just in my particular situation, it wasn't a part of that phase, and I wasn't really in the mood or felt like video games or TV would give something to me. Therefore, it just played a very minor role overall in the experience, since it didn't really force me, to the most part, of discovering that for myself. That being said, it definitely plays a dominant role within the game. Especially once you're more or less locked in within your apartment, you're no longer going to work. There's a big action that happens towards the game, basically preventing you from going to work after a certain point. There's not much you can do in that department. You can shower, you can brush your teeth, you can make food, look out of the window, and the other only form of entertainment or action is video games and the consumption of TV. So. Yeah, I guess that's my point.
Yeah. So you're circling kind of in your apartment between sleeping, eating, and entertainment. So, and yes, that's why I chose the game to come first in this quartet, because I think it kind of hits home with regards to the home office situation, because we're starting this cycle in the home office a bit sometimes, aren't we? Jupiter, what do you think about the gaming in the game and the home office situation? Can this be kind of a warning, like playing this a warning to people to get out and do stuff to avoid this kind of situation?
So video games are always a big part of escapism for many, many people, myself included. So video games are a way to sort of unwind, relax, and not think about all that's going on around you, because you can be in this little world that's different and perfect. But especially with COVID a year on, sometimes escaping within your own reality in the same spot that you've been in all the time, it becomes super unfulfilling and almost monotonous. So going out and seeing the world and having other hobbies is such an important part of taking care of yourself, even though it might not seem like taking care of yourself. Limiting just your world to being entertained through such small means, even though there's millions of video games, it's not very good, and it can end up being quite bad for people. So it definitely shows the power of getting out for the amount of time that you can, or just refreshing where you are and being able to take other activities to other spaces around you. That the room was so small in that game, you really didn't have much choice or option to go out. It's not like you could go into a study for a long time and do just something completely different. And it's something that needs to be taken into consideration when it comes to self-care and making sure that your mental state is okay.
Absolutely. Then again, you have that window that you can look out of to see the sometimes beautiful park outside, and still you're not the person going out, So yeah. You could go there. So it's just within reach. Anyway, Schott, some final words?
I just can recommend to play this game if you feel like it, because I think it offers some interesting perspective on the whole issue, mental health and games. And yeah, I think it's worth playing, but with a skeptical mind.
Yeah, absolutely skeptical. But that's again, and I wanted to emphasize that like avoiding life or avoiding certain topics is not reserved for games. I mean, some people binge watch TV series, right? Or read comic books or whatever. Play tennis. And I'm always saying escapism is a part of your life. Sometimes you want to escape from certain things. It's only getting critical if you do it too much, and you can do it with various means and formats, as I said. Okay, thank you. This was Please Knock on My Door, and we're now moving towards Fran Bow, the game that Jupiter Hadley picked. Jupiter, why did you choose it? And do you want to see the trailer first?
Yeah, let's do the trailer first.
Okay, thank you. Let's see the trailer. Thank you, Jupiter. This game looks awesome, very artsy, very artistic too. Why did you choose it, and what does it have to do with mental health?
So Fran Bow is a point-and-click adventure game by Killmonday, who at the time was a very small studio working on this game. And it's based on some reflections from one of the creators' real life, which is very interesting. But it's a much more sort of fantasy game than the previous game mentioned. In Fran Bow, you play as a little girl who had a very traumatic experience happen to her. And as a result of that, she now does not have parents or anyone looking after her, and she's sent away to an asylum where she's given experimental medication, and she doesn't have a choice or a voice in this. She's a person who's put in these circumstances and has no way of controlling it, and because she's deemed as someone who has a mental illness, who's mad now because of the experience, she's no longer deemed as someone who can have a voice about her own health and how she's treated. Also, she's a child. So it's very hard to give her a voice in society being so young. Fran Bow starts taking these pills, and they don't really fix things. They give her a second version of reality, and they give her this second world to explore, and it's not something that she's initially scared of, which is something I always found quite powerful when playing the game. She's not afraid of the world when it becomes gruesome or dark because it's her reality. It's what she's seeing as just a normal thing. And when people have bouts of madness and when people experience hallucinations, because a lot of hallucinations in this, a lot of times it is their reality and it is perfectly almost normal to them, and it is like a part of the world, even though it might be scary from the outside looking in. And this point of view is very interesting to explore. Throughout the game, when she takes this medication, she gets to solve puzzles, and those puzzles are the way that she interacts with the world, and it seems like quite a small payoff for changing your world to be so gruesome, but these puzzles and the characters that are in the secondary world allow her to build connections and meaningful relationships. And when you experience mental illness, it's such an isolating thing, especially as a result of a traumatic event, whereas this character is able to use her trauma, and she's able to use these very negative cards that she's dealt to create meaningful relationships that help her continue to discover who she is. And the end of the game is super open-ended, and you end up questioning whether Fran Bow's world was mainly in her head, or was reality, or was just this medication. Like, what bits of it are true and what bits of it are false? But in the end of the day, for her, all of that was reality, every aspect of it. So it's such a different point of view when it comes to mental illness and long-term mental illness and the way that one processes and experiences traumatic events, because this is how she's processing it. Because of the situation she's in, this is the only choice she has to process all of the stuff that's happened in her life. So I found it was a very captivating and quite emotional game as well. It's one of the first games that I've played through in one sitting. After playing the first chapter, I then continued, and then when I was done, I just started crying, and it was like such a big release at the end. So it's the game that I normally think of when I think of just characters who have overcome and who have struggled with mental illness and aren't shown as a villain or a bad guy or someone who's so defected they're lost, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like the central theme of the game is basically mental illness or treatment of mental illness. So as you mentioned, the girl so we're playing the girl in directly and not in a distanced gameplay mode, like with Please Knock on My Door, right? Yeah. So does this help with the identification process or the immersion in the game?
I think it does for me. I really felt like her, and I really felt emotionally attached to the characters that she was attaching herself with. There's one point in the game where you stop getting your medicine, and you'd think that would be a good thing, you know? You're off of your medicine, you're back, but it's not good for her. Her friends are gone now. These creatures that she cares for, they're gone. These aspects of her world are gone for a small amount of time. And I felt like, no, this is unfair, even though, as an adult, I know that that's what's better for her. These hallucinations aren't helpful or aren't healthy for her. So I connected with her a lot through playing as her.
Interesting. So you said that the pills open the second world for her, and she's creating meaningful relationships with these creatures there. So are the pills helping treating her mental health issues?
I think that it's definitely something that's been discussed widely, because this game has sort of a cult following, and they all like diving into the deeper meaning of all of the different aspects of the games. There's so many theories around. I feel like they did help her when it came to being able to communicate in a way towards other people, but at the same time, it wasn't something that she had a choice in. It wasn't something that should have been. I don't think that experimental medicine should be given to children, full stop. So I don't think that that's something that should be happening ever. And that actually, one of the main creators talked about how she herself had personally been given experimental medication as a child, and how that had long-term effects on her. And that's something she wanted to portray in the game. So I think as much as it helped, it was also a hindrance. Yeah. And it's a double-edged sword, basically.
Yeah. You talked about the helplessness of her situation a bit, and I think that's resonating a lot with people having mental illnesses and maybe being treated for mental illnesses, that they are not being taken seriously by their family and friends. There's this stigma associated with madness and therapy, because which actually keeps people from seeking out therapy and getting better, which then is a bad thing. Do you think that this game helps, like while playing that? Do you get a different level of understanding about the stigma and this helplessness of mentally ill people?
For me personally, I did. In the opening sequence of the game, you have this little girl trying to talk to a doctor and trying to explain what's happening, and them being completely dismissive, not really caring about what she has to say. And because of that, she feels that her only choice to be a surviving human in this world is to leave this place, to leave what's supposed to be a place where she's supposed to get help and be taken care of. And I think that helps sort of exactly highlight the feeling of vulnerability you have to do when you go and say, I have a problem, I need help, and how the lack of understanding, and how if someone does come out who's supposed to help you, or who you're just coming to for support, if they're the first person and they're like, look, this isn't that bad, or this isn't, we're fixing this already, you're fine now, or any sort of like slightly negative blocks. I don't know, the way that it's portrayed in the game is you get a sudden block, like suddenly what you're saying doesn't matter, you're a child, it doesn't matter anymore, and that sort of block is not helpful when it comes to situations where people do come forward and they are like, hey, I'm struggling with this, hey, I'm having issues, because it can so easily turn that person to not want to communicate about it and take more extreme measures, which is what Fran does. She completely leaves what should be helpful, and that understanding is something that needs to be better known, because it's so hard to open up about mental illness, and it's so hard, especially about madness. It's so hard to be like, I have had a friend in my life who had a psychological breakdown for a couple of years, and he went to an asylum, and it was something that he never really spoke about, but despite having a big part of his life away from society. And it's not a big negative. He's fine now. His life's moved on and everything's fine, but it took him so long to get help because he kept thinking, well, I'm just weird. Oh, well, it's not that bad. And when he did mention it to people in his life, they completely turned away and were like, you have a job. You're fine. You have a house. You're fine. And sometimes it's so much more than that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, let's open this up a bit. I wanted to ask you, Jupiter, and then maybe take Please Knock on My Door into account too a bit, because I have the feeling that the gameplay and mechanics of Fran Bow and Please Knock on My Door are kind of reduced. How would you judge that? How would you describe the gameplay situation in Fran Bow? Is it very complex, or is it more easy to handle, mid-core, or even lighter? What do you think?
I think that there are some tricky puzzles, but it's a game that you can bumble your way through, and there won't be like tons of ill effects or anything. You can bumble your way through, or find it's a point-and-click adventure game, so you can always find like guides to help you almost, because there is a set path, and that's the path you're following. So it's not that difficult to get into.
So it's like a kind of chronological story being told. It's not very complex. That kind of helps my point, because I have the feeling also with Please Knock on My Door that the reduced gameplay is actually helping telling the story of a narrative-driven game here a lot. Dom, how do you feel about this with regards to Please Knock on My Door?
Yeah, I think in the case of Please Knock on My Door, the structure around situations. The game offers situations and asks you to decide what the main character wants to do, and then plays out the effects of it, serves the idea of the game. In the case of Fran Bow, I think it's I've played it myself, but I didn't play the whole game. I really liked it. In the case of Fran Bow, and correct me if I'm wrong there, Jupiter, it's a more proactive idea of playing through mental illness, because you're always asked to solve puzzles. You are always asked to find solutions, to get to the next screen, to the next chapter, and so on. And it's more like a proactive way of looking at things. While in Please Knock on My Door, you always find yourself in these situations. There's no real solution. There is no real positive or negative outcome, at least for the next minutes or so. So I think they are both going in very different directions with their take on mental health.
Yeah, you're correct. There is a reward mechanism at the end of everything that you have to try for. There is a reward. You are slowly getting better. So it's different in that aspect.
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Chris, what do you think? Does the reduced gameplay help along the central themes of the games here? So is this kind of interconnected?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on the title per se. I mean, the 4 titles that we're looking at today, without spoiling what we'll be discussing later on, mechanically wise, just vary quite heavily in their complexity. My title that I've selected is very simplistic in its approach, even within its genre, and opens itself up to much broader audience than maybe a more hardcore-driven title would be in its genre. Same goes for your title that we'll be discussing soon. And then again, the difference between Fran Bow and Please Knock on My Door is, I think, to a certain degree, quite heavy in the sense of their mechanics, which are quite simplistic in Please Knock on My Door, which was very interesting to myself, because I like that kind of approachability when it comes to this topic, whereas Fran Bow, being a very important and very interesting title overall, didn't quite resonate as much with me due to an additional layer of gameplay being added on top.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, do you have any more questions about Fran Bow to Jupiter, or things you want to discuss about this?
So I would have a question for Jupiter. Does therapy play any role in the game further down the way? You mentioned that you get to meet your therapist right at the beginning of the game, but this doesn't work out for Fran. So does therapy play any role further down the way?
Towards the very end of the game, you do get to reconcile with some of the adults that played decisions in your life. It's not a particularly positive or negative experience. It's just sort of wrapping up what happened in your childhood. But therapy doesn't end up playing a major role in it, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have another question, especially in terms of the audience, since we talked a little bit about that as well as with Dom's title. Between a more hardcore audience and a more casual, approachable audience, where do you see Fran Bow, what kind of audience do you see the title be a potentially suitable fit for, just in terms of approachability?
Definitely not a younger audience, that's for sure. There's a lot of gore and blood and very scary things. Even though it's cartoon violence, it's still quite violent. If some of the puzzles are quite hard, so it does hit people who want to be challenged when it comes to like puzzle adventures, and people who like narrative-driven adventures but want to get more out of like reading in between the lines. Lots of hidden stuff in it. So I'd say it's more hardcore than a general puzzle game. But it depends on really the scale of how hardcore players are and whatnot.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Also for the suggestion. I'll definitely check the game out. That was Fran Bow. what studio was it again?
Killmondays.
Yeah, right. They did an awesome job on this, and I think that it's quite fortunate that we're having an influx of games that are actually making serious and culturally important topics to take them into their central themes. That's, I think that's really helping games along in the long run. Okay, so we'll be talking about Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice now. This is my own pick, and I'd like to see the trailer first too.
In this waking nightmare, where all dreams come true, you searched for control, a way to pull through. When you were in love, you left him in tears, to smother your furies and banish your fears. But in darkness they came, through stormy black seas they raided these shores. Do you still hear his screams? And now that you're home, he's so far away. They've taken his soul. To these gods you cannot pray. They can break you, but not your promise. Even death won't keep you apart. Through his darkness you will find him. In your sword still beats a heart. You fought for love unspoilt by your darkness within. You fought for your dreams. Now there's no way to win. In the head of his corpse lies the seat of his soul. So we must carry his vessel to bring him back home.
This was the trailer to Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. It's from a studio called Ninja Theory. And was made or published in 2017. I think it's quite noticeable that this is the nearest thing we're having that's with regards to a AAA title, and still it hasn't been published by a big publisher like, I don't know, Ubisoft, Sony, or something like that. Still, to the story. Senua is I assume, Celtic warrior. She's traveling to Helheim to reclaim the soul of her dead lover Dillion. She's encountering hindrances and problems. She has to, quite early in the game, you discover that she's actually dealing with a heavy psychosis. She's hearing voices, several sets of voices actually. Some are nice, sound nice, and some sound awful. But you never know which ones are actually lying to you or which ones are helping you along. So this is kind of the ultimate feeling of disorientation in a game that I've ever experienced via audio design, which is amazing, by the way. So you have to play it with earphones, basically. That's kind of enhancing the whole situation and the experience of the game. And the further you come in the game, the more you actually have to dig into Senua's past and into her mental problems, which threaten her to kill her, actually. And this is one major thing that the game plays with, which is highly debated on the internet, by the way, that the game very early on says, so you can die in this game because this is a kind of a mental journey or a soul journey, but still you can die in this game, and each time you die you get this this festering illness on your arm that's visible, and as soon as these dark streaks reach your head, you will be dead for good, and everything will be deleted. So the game plays with permadeath. That you, if you die too often, you cannot, like, you have to start from the ultimate beginning of the game, which kind of enhances the whole experience as well. Like I said, the audio design of the game is absolutely fantastic. The animation of Senua, the central character, and the fighting animations too. What's important to know too is that they talked to a doctor about psychosis. He was a coach for the game, and also with people who are affected by psychosis, and took that into account to make this game about psychosis, which is, as I feel, absolutely respectful to the condition, because it takes things seriously that you experience in the game. It's also playing like Fran Bow. It's also playing with the matter of reality. So what's real in this game? You never know what's real. At first, I had kind of a problem of getting into that character and understanding that character, because she felt kind of off to me, like her eyes and her behavior. She was obviously dealing with a lot of pain and grief. On the other hand, she's a person that knows what she wants. She has a very clear goal and wants to fight for it. And I did respect that in the character. And still, you enter the game, and the longer you play it, the more immersed into the character and the surrounding you get. And at some point in the game, you realize it's kind of not important what's real, because everything that you see and experience is important to Senua, and that is what counts in the story. So this is like Fran Bow a bit, which deals with a girl battling her mental problems. This is the ultimate portrayal of a woman battling with herself and her mental illness. The atmosphere is fantastic. We also, like, if you compare the game to other games that offer like a sword gameplay, a third-person perspective, you might say that the mechanics and the gameplay is not overly complex too, so it doesn't break any records in this regard. And that's the reason why I asked you guys about the reduced gameplay perspective, because I have the feeling that this is actually helping these unapologetically narrative storylines that focus around one central character and want to tell their story. What do you feel about this? Chris, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think going into the experience, I myself was a little bit surprised at first at how simplistic is not the right word, but comparing it to sort of the combat mechanics out of the Dark Souls, for example. It's not trying to be the next Souls-like title. It's trying to depict a character in a sometimes delusional, sometimes hallucinating stage. And
let me just cut in there. Dark Souls is one of the examples where you as a player have to learn to lead the games and the fights very much yourself, and the fighting is very hard compared to other titles, for example, that not everybody might know that. So go on, please.
Yeah, and I think what's especially to be highlighted here with Ninja Theory's approach is the serious way that they treat the topic. There's a phenomenal documentary that I can strongly recommend that's up on YouTube, also produced by Ninja Theory, that focuses solely on how they treated the topic, how they worked, as you had mentioned, with professionals. The game starts in its intro cinematics with the first credits going towards these two doctors that were involved in the process. And seeing that come from I'd consider a AA studio of size, putting their money where their mouth is, and investing so much resources into an actual accurate and fair representation of this topic, rather than villainizing a person dealing with mental health, which we see way too often in the AAA space, unfortunately, is just outstanding. And I'm glad it got the reception that it clearly deserved, and that we'll see a sequel, I believe, in the coming years.
Absolutely. Jupiter, what's your take on this?
I'd like to build off of what Chris said, because it's kind of an interesting it's kind of interesting that they did have all of these doctors participate in it. We see so many games, especially from indie developers, which show firsthand their experience dealing with these topics, but having actual professionals weigh in brings such a bigger respect towards that illness and towards portraying mental health. So I'm curious to see if that's something that going forward, more places and more people who are making games will pick up, having that much research involved. And it's an interesting question on if that should be the default. If by default, making these games that cover mental illness should have input from actual doctors, from actual healthcare professionals, and just professionals generally, and that if that's a more responsible way of making these types of games, because it does show in the development, it does show in the final product a much greater understanding, depth, and respect, which was very good in the Hellblade game.
Absolutely. I mean, it probably depends on how much the central theme or the central character builds on that mental illness. Like an entertainment game that has one psychotic killer in it might not have to consult so heavily with psychological or psychotherapists as this game, for example. But yeah, I'm totally right there with you. If you take this into account, you should probably ask either professionals or people who are affected by that and take their perspective into account. Dom, how do you feel about this game and the central theme?
Yeah, I've always wondered why it's a female protagonist. I mean, the game is a powerful message, and I really loved the game. I love Senua, but I always wondered how this game would have been perceived and reviewed if it was a grim, strong male warrior who suffers from mental illness and needs to confront himself, like a more reflective, introspective, thank you. Like a more introspective Kratos, for example. Especially, I mean, in this setting, it is still typical for men to be brave and strong and being the typical Wikinger. So I was wondering how the game would have changed in its perception if the protagonist was a male warrior and not a female one.
Does it take this alleged helplessness of the woman into account in the situation? Like, is this kind of a play on that this is unusual for a female to be a warrior and battling this, or how do you feel about that?
I'm not sure about that, because the game early on introduces Senua as a warrior, as a capable warrior, and I think looking at pop culture in the recent years, even when Hellblade was released, we are already used to the images of brave and capable Norse female warriors. Series like Vikings got us used to this, but I still think in games there are a lot of there's still this place where people think if they see a male warrior in a Norse setting, like Vikingers or Danes or something like that, they think, okay, it's that tough guy who seldom opens up or just fights, just be angry and grumpy and so on, muscular. And I think this game could have changed a lot about that perception if it was a male protagonist.
Yeah. Maybe this is like basically would have been reverse sexist a bit, because I think that like for a woman, it's kind of accepted to show weakness and to be depicted in a state where she suffers from her illness. For a man, that might have been a totally different thing, actually. He might actually have been seen as whiny or whatever. No? So we will never know because it's a female protagonist. But I do agree, it's kind of a mind game here. So, Chris, anything to add, or Jupiter? Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add at this point.
Great.
Everyone, I think, should check out Hellblade, even if it's just for the trailer, and learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. These are my final words on my pick, Senua Hellblade, Senua Sacrifice. It is a stunning game, both visually and audio-visually. It's like the animation is fantastic, and the topic of psychosis is, I think, tackled very respectfully and can teach you a lot about what people suffer from if they have that diagnosis, and maybe take them seriously too, because it doesn't always matter what's really real, but people are affected by their own reality a lot. Even non-mentally ill people are affected by their perspective on reality too. And with someone suffering from psychosis, this is even more so the case. Okay, thank you. Now we're coming, like we have about half an hour left. I think we're good in timing-wise. And now we're looking at Greece. This is Chris Wulf's pick. And are we going to see the trailer first?
Yeah, let's stick to
okay. Let's do that.
First.
Thank you so much. Chris, why did you pick this game, and what does it have to do with mental health issues?
Yeah, so Grizz, to give everyone that hasn't heard about the title a little bit of backstory here, Grizz is a, I believe, 2018 release title by Spanish developer Nomada Studio, published by Devolver Digital, which is at least stereotypically, historically, more of an action-driven publisher. So Grizz definitely was a standout in their publishing portfolio in that sense. Grizz is a title that deals with the 5 stages of grief, and a little bit different in the sense that a title such as "Please Knock on My Door" was representative of a singular story. Grizz keeps a lot of its storytelling very vague and very open. There's no written narrative. The game delivers its entire messaging through gameplay, through animations, through the score and the art. Well, just astonishingly beautiful art style of the title. Plays a lot with colors, which we'll get to in a second, but overall takes you as a character, in this case again a young female protagonist called Grizz, through the experience of sort of the ups and downs, the 5 stages of grief. In this case, other than proven with a very singular path through the 5 stages. It doesn't vary from player to player, but as I'd mentioned before in my example, it's a very streamlined experience. There's not much room to dive into separate paths, but instead it's an adventure platformer where you'll follow a certain path throughout the experience without major puzzles. There's some minor puzzle mechanics, but nothing too complicated. I think it's very approachable. I remember showing my mother a couple of years ago Journey from that game company, and I think this is in a similar way a title that someone that's also not too closely connected with the world of video games might find approachable enough to dive into. Jumping back to the topic of colors. So in Grizz, to give just a little bit of context, not to jump too far in advance, the story kicks off with Grizz being a singing character being surrounded by colors. It's a very colorful inter-animation until the female a figurine, a massive statue, crumbles and lets Gris fall into this, well, basically through the clouds all the way to the ground into this pit, which is very colorless, and in that case supposed to depict the denial stage of the 5 stages of grief. That transitions forward into the anger stage, which is led by red as a color, goes on and on through bargaining, depression, and then finally the acceptance stage, always adding another color to the scheme until at the end of the game you're again, spoiling here a little bit, surrounded by color, although it is still a very impactful experience knowing that from the get-go. The anger stage, as one example, is quite interesting to me as it depicts certain examples, or it selects certain examples that may or may not apply for certain people that have gone through the 5 stages of grief, or however many it might have been for them. One good example being Gris as the main protagonist destroying a rock which housed a small little robot, and that robot then escaping from you, visibly being afraid of what Gris has become or what Gris as a character acts. And over time, you will rediscover and reconnect with certain creatures throughout the entire world of Gris, becoming more and more open to you being around due to you evolving and living through these stages. Ultimately, what I think Gris is very vital for is not necessarily being the game that will help you get through grief. Everyone has their own experience and their own path with dealing with grief, but it depicts grief in a way that I think is a little bit more approachable and makes people understand that you will have to go through certain stages, you will have to deal with certain hurdles in building yourself up again from the denial stage all the way through acceptance, and does that in a very artistic way, opening itself up to a lot of room for interpretation and being, as I'd mentioned, approachable for a variety of players. Maybe not everyone, but certainly a variety of players that want to deal with it in their own means and their own ways.
Right, thank you, Chris Wulf, about the game Gris, in which we're seeing a girl dealing with the 5 stages of depression. We're talking about mental health here. My first question to you, Chris, I found, judging on what we talked about with the other 3 games, gameplay-wise, is this rather complex or rather simple, what would you say?
I would argue it's rather simple. There's not really any hurdles. There's not anything that will be in your path to completing the title. I played through it the first time that I discovered it in one sitting, which is about 4 to 6 hours, and it was just generally very approachable.
Okay, so it looks fantastic, and I will definitely this one. I will definitely check. I will check them all out, but this one I'm particularly interested in because I think it has such a stunning play with colors and the visuals, and it looks approachable from people who haven't played a lot of games yet. To me, about you told us the entrance sequence, and we saw it in the trailer. Basically, a girl, Gris, is singing, and it's very beautiful, and then her voice falters and she cannot sing anymore. I don't know if you have experienced this, but if I'm not mentally stable, I cannot write. So I'm a writer, I'm a novelist, I write novels and games. And if I have emotional troubles or mental problems, then my artistic expression is kind of faltering, and I have problems putting things on the white sheet. I think maybe, is this the stage of realization in Gris, Chris?
I think yes and no. It's a little bit what you want to make Gris to be about. Like for me personally, Gris was a lot about the actual grief of losing someone very close to you, and felt very reflective of a stage that I had to go through in my life as well, and that all of us will go through eventually, of figuring out how to deal with that, starting with denial and then ending ideally at some point, no matter how hard, with the acceptance stage. What Gris does is it has an example within the game, which the developers kept rather vague, but people figured for themselves that the figurine that was destroyed at the beginning was some kind of resemblance of a character, potentially, that was important to Gris. The example of like a mother-like figure was written about quite often, and in that case depicted just one of many examples of how you yourself as a player wants to interpret the experience of dealing with that loss. So I hope that's a satisfying answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I've also had the feeling, because this crumbling stone that Gris is sitting on is a hand, and it looks like this is the hand maybe of her mother. Like I would interpret it from the trailer and the videos that I saw like that. But there may be other interpretations actually, and that's one of the strong suits of Gris. I think that it's so open to interpretation. And though I'm a narrative designer, I love games that do not use words. It's fantastic if you can build all of that story and world building into the art, the audio, and into the animation and into the gameplay, of course, and wrap it all up and tell a story nonetheless that is very personal to the player. I also loved about the game that it seems to be very honest about the setbacks in the grieving process, so that this is not a straight line. This is not like linear. It's basically you return to several stages in this. I think it's the Kubler-Ross model, right? So it's not universally acknowledged, but I think nevertheless the game and in real life you can experience that basically in the grieving process you have setbacks and you basically run in circles sometimes. And I think that, do you think that could help people really suffering from grief going through their process, or is it too hidden in the visuals?
So as you'd mentioned, I'm obviously not a medical professional. The way I see it, Gris, at least for myself, it's something that helped me now after having gone through the grief process once before, to understand a little bit from an outside view of how these different stages work, and also sort of draw the line and draw the correlations between what I experienced and how the game depicts it and how the game deals with it. You'd mentioned it's not necessarily like a very linear game, but much rather has its core hub that the player returns to again and again. It's more of a vertical game, starting off at the very top within the clouds, dropping all the way down during the depression phase to sort of like an underwater scenario, very highlighted by blue colors. And in that sense, I think can help the player very much understand what they may have gone through, or also get an understanding of what potentially they will go through in the beginning, or not in the beginning, but later on in their life, but not necessarily be a game that while they're in the process will help them ultimately. But that can differ from player to player.
Yeah, I mean, a game cannot be a therapy. We all agree on that. It can help you along, and it can resonate with you about the topics you're going through, but it will never be a therapy session. That's go see a doctor if you need that. Okay. One final question to you, Chris, and I'd like to open the floor then, because we have around 15 to 20 minutes left. With Gris, could the story and this process of going through these stages of grief have been told in any other medium?
That's a good
question. Could it have been a movie or a TV series or a book? That's
a very good question. I mean, generally, the topic can definitely be handled in different forms of media. What I think made Gris especially important and interesting is the interactivity. It is not a mechanics-heavy game. It will be in many senses a similar playthrough for a lot of players. But I think having the opportunity to experience it yourself and having these tiny little choices, how you act within the different phases, as I've mentioned, and when you're in the anger phase, you can destroy objects, and that carries on throughout the game because you learn certain limited abilities. So I think that definitely adds to the experience. But yeah, the topic certainly can be handled in other medias, though oftentimes in a more limited fashion.
Yeah, a little more limited and not in the exact same interactivity interactive way. Actually, I had the same feeling that, like with all the games we're presenting, it's actually quite fascinating that they are games and not movies or a series or a short movie or something like that. Dom, how do you feel about your game, Please Knock on My Door? Could this have been told in any other medium with the same impact? Let's put it like that.
In this case, I don't think so. The game experiments a lot with gameplay as a result of your actions. For example, if you are getting worse and worse and worse, and you don't feel that good anymore, your character starts to move more slowly. There are options when you try to interact with the world which are grayed out or written in red, which is very powerful, even more when you play the game and not only watch a let's play or would have read it in a book or something like that. So I think this game in particular profits a lot from the possibilities of the medium. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the same feeling, because you actually feel when the figure moves slower, and you see the clock ticking. I mean, you could see the clock ticking in a movie too, but if you are the godlike creature behind it, behind him steering the person, then it's something else entirely through the gameplay. Jupiter, how about Fran Bow? Is this games only, or could it have been a short movie?
I'd binge watched an entire Netflix series of Fran Bow's life and experiences, and beyond what was even seen in the game itself. I feel like I could easily watch that as a series myself. The only thing that you'd mainly lose is the choice for when you take medicine, because that becomes a big feature in the game, is when do you decide to see the scary stuff, and you as a person have to accept that you want to see the scary stuff, because it's very limited. When you take medicine, it only works for like a few minutes or a few seconds really, and then it goes back to reality. So I don't know how that'd be portrayed in a movie itself, because you wouldn't have the option to select to see the scary stuff, or if you want to stay mainly in the world without the scary stuff. But I think it could still be impactful as a movie or a TV series.
Impactful, I think so too. I think Fran Bow is kind of the only one where I'd say it might be possible to actually have a similar experience to that. I think that with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, the interactivity of the medium and all the games that came before it, like the tropes of games and the gameplay mechanics of games, work towards the resonating message or the feeling, the immersion of the character. Because there are certain tropes that you associate with, hack and slay or Souls-like games where you fight against monsters, and there are usually these spaces that are so big and they are lighted, and it's a certain amount of antagonists and so forth. And this game actually plays with darkness, where you don't see a thing. Or with it turns these tropes on their heads and actually deceives you about certain things and lies to you at some points, where you can actually you have to decide what do you believe in and what not. So I think that you could obviously always make a movie out of a game, but with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, it wouldn't be as impactful a learning experience or an immersive experience as it would be in a movie. Right. Which is important for us, because we're here sitting talking about games for the foundation of digital games culture, and usually we talk about the cultural and societal impact of games and their meaning and resonance to people who are playing them. So. Okay, do you guys, Jupiter and Dom, do you have some questions for Chris about Gris?
Please go first.
Okay.
I played Gris. I really liked it. I really like how beautiful it is. That's what first drew me to it. But it is, as you said, a story-based game with no story. And because it was a story-based game with no story, going into it, you kind of find what you want to take out of it. So when I played it, I don't have a very good relationship with my mom. I never did. So the crumbling hand of a statue never was a mother in my head. It was never going to be a mother in my head. So it was a completely different experience on that. Do you think that the game would have still been as impactful if it had a actual story the entire time through that you were following?
That's an interesting question. I think it could have, but the way I see it, I think Gris benefited a lot at the end of the day from being that open, from opening itself up for that room of interpretation, something that not necessarily can be given in other media, since we talked about movies and TV shows. So I guess the short answer is yes, theoretically, but in a very precise way that wouldn't have been as approachable to as many people. So I would personally, in this case, definitely stick to the way it had been handled.
Mm-hmm. Tom?
Yeah. So over the years, a lot of people told me when they talked about this game that they used this game as an opportunity to get a clear mind, to meditate and become more calm, because this game offers this possibility. It helped them, they told me, to zone out instead of actually focusing on the game itself. Did you make that experience as well? How do you feel about that?
I personally didn't. For me, it was more of an intense experience overall, and in a positive way at the end of the day. The individual elements that contribute to the game, though, I have felt are quite good to zone out to. I think it's called, I think the band or the collective or the individual interpret behind the score of the game, Berlinist, did a phenomenal job, and I got goosebumps when we were listening to the trailer music again, in creating a medium that can also stand very well on its own. And I find myself zoning out to just rewatching the trailer or listening to the music itself, or even having just a screenshot of the game as my background wallpaper on my PC. But yeah, that's the beauty. I mean, everyone has their own experience of how the game may or may not have had an impact on them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to add to what Jupiter just said. I have the feeling, of course, that the more room you leave for interpretation, the more the person playing the game brings into it. We all agree on that, I think. This is the very definition of art. You find yourself in a piece of art. And I quite like that about Greece, because everybody brings something else to the table and takes something else away from this table, and that is a quality that very few games actually reach, I think. So yeah, thanks for that suggestion, Chris. So coming back to, we've looked at 4 games. My final question, and we have 5 minutes left, is that all of them, maybe this with the possible exception of Gris, but I think that may be a bit too, all of them don't really rely on new groundbreaking mechanics. So my provocative question would be, do meaningful games that resonate with people, that maybe are more of a piece of art than other games, do they rely on reduced gameplay mechanics? Is that a thing that we can see, Jupiter?
Ooh, this is a really interesting question.
It's a provocative one.
Yeah, I don't think all of them rely on reduced gameplay mechanics necessarily, but having reduced gameplay mechanics and having mechanics that have already been introduced to people as a whole mean that they are more approachable. So it lets the story and the meaning and the true point of the game, I suppose, shine through in a better light, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I feel that because there wasn't very, very big gameplay barriers through new mechanics or through like groundbreaking mechanics that not everyone would be familiar with, or just being mechanic heavy, it means that more people could pick up, play, understand the themes within it, which were more on the emotional and mental health side of things.
Mm-hmm. Dom, how do you feel about this question?
Yeah, I would totally underline that. Maybe to add, I think these games can experiment in a special way with difficulty if they combine it with the narrative. So, like in the case of Please Knock on My Door, the game kind of gets harder if you down spiral a lot. If you don't feel good in the game becomes in a way harder. It's hard to get out of that corner and reconnect with people and friends and start going to work again. So they do something interesting with difficulty here, but all in all, I would totally go with Jupiter here and say the more accessible these games are, the better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, approachability is absolutely a thing with a reduced and not overly complex gameplay, of course. Chris, you have the final words to this question. What's your take?
I do tend to agree. I think there is a opportunity for games with more complex mechanics overall also to shine in spotlight. Celeste comes to mind as a rather complex title that does deal with anxiety, that does deal with depression. That being said, as the three of you have already mentioned, approachability, which I've said way too often today, is a major topic. And I know that approachability drove me a little bit away from Celeste at first. And I'm certain some players didn't get a chance to actually experience it due to that topic. So there is space for everything in games. That's a wonderful part about our medium. I tend to be more on the side of I'd prefer some approachability when it comes to serious topics, but I fully respect if someone wants to play as Celeste to understand or to relive those experiences.
Thank you. What a wonderful final statement too. This was the Quartet of Games Culture by the Stiftung Digitale Spielekultur, the Foundation for Digital Games Culture. I'm Lena Falkenhagen. My guests today were Jupiter Hadley, Christopher Wulf, and Dom Schott. Thank you for being here. We talked together about discovering a new peace of mind, mental health in video games, and therewith I conclude this session. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.